This has not necessarily been the season that either the San Francisco 49ers or the Miami Dolphins envisioned for 2024, but it's the one we got. And we got a match between these two teams in Week 16. Kyle Crabbs, Locked On Dolphins. Brian Peacock, Locked On 49ers. We have your crossover here on the Locked On Network.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network. I'm Kyle Crabbs of Locked On Dolphins, joined by Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers, previewing this Week 16 matchup. Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app, use code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome and shout out to our everydayers here on the Locked On Network. We don't just say it, we live it. It is your team every day, even when your team is 6-8 and probably ready for the year to end, which is where many Dolphins and 49ers fans, I'm sure, are finding themselves. Brian, it's good to catch up. We last did this in 2022. Was an exciting game early. The debut of Brock Purdy. Much has changed for both teams since that time. How are things in the midst of this year?
Unbelievable parallels with these two football teams right now. And eyes have quickly been looking at the offseason for 49ers fans. And the biggest story this week that we've been talking about is Brock Purdy not playing against the Miami Dolphins, but Brock Purdy's contract potentially, and reports that he might be looking for a market reset contract at quarterback, which means the most money that's ever been paid to a human being in the history of pro football. Right. And that's what that means when you reset the market at quarterback in the NFL right now. And that money has skyrocketed. And that's kind of one of the parallels that's going on with these two teams. So, I mean, I know we want to talk about this football game, and it's important in Week 16. And as Nick Bosa put it, we're going to find out who wants to be here. So that's kind of where we're at as far as what's going on in the field the last 3 weeks for the 49ers. I'm sure it feels similarly for the Dolphins. But you just went through this since that last meeting. Tua Tagovailoa got a huge contract, right? What was $53 million per year? I think there's some pretty good comps between the two quarterbacks in Brock Purdy and Tua. So can you tell my 49er fan listeners what they can expect with this contract negotiation this offseason?
Yeah. So first and foremost, welcome to quarterback contract discourse, yes. Which is very fun. A lot of strong opinions on either side of the fence. And it's especially fascinating to see a player that's very clearly well-tailored for the environment that he's in, but doesn't pass the same beauty pageant sniff test that so traditionally your elite quarterbacks with elite traits. It makes it a lot easier to process the idea of giving this guy top of dollar market because he can physically do things that nobody else in the world can do. I think, and I made a big point to focus on this because it helps with perspective when Tua Tagovailoa was going through his contract negotiation experience with the Dolphins. The salary cap is growing at a rate that is more dramatic than the salaries themselves are growing. So you'll see a raw number that's thrown out there with a negotiation for a contract. And this was the case with Tua Tagovailoa. And you'd immediately get sticker shock and say, wow, really? Like that's a lot of money. But if you look at it through the lens of what is the annual average of that contract and what percent of the salary cap is that the year that it signs, that is a better indicator, I think, than just the raw dollars, because of how the salary cap is growing. So, for example, Tua signed his 4-year extension. That was $53.1 million per season. That was $100,000 more per year than Jared Goff, who had signed his. Jordan Love the next day signs for $55. That tied Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence for the highest AAV. And then Dak Prescott signed his for $60 after that and reset the market. But even Dak Prescott getting $60, the annual average of $60 million per season as a percentage of this year's salary cap is a lesser investment than what the Bengals made in Joe Burrow with what the salary cap was that year and what Even Josh Allen's contract is number 2 from an annual average salary percentage of cap perspective. Tua's ranks 12th amongst quarterback contracts in the NFL, even though it was $51.3 million, because in the past 3-4 years, you've seen the salary cap go up $60 million per team. And they're expecting and forecasting another $17 to $20 million increase this offseason. So whatever your focus is, to give you the best perspective on how big the investment is in the player, look at the average annual salary as a percentage of the cap during the year of the signing. I think that will paint a better picture for you.
Absolutely. And by the way, thank God Brock Purdy isn't left-handed, because then he really wouldn't pass the eye test, and nobody would want to give him.
We'd have to be inverting all of his videos on social media just to see what it would look like if he was a normal quarterback, and this, that, the other thing.
Exactly. It's funny you bring up Josh Allen too, because Josh Allen's probably thinking to himself, yeah, reset the market real cute. Watch what happens after whatever business happens this offseason, then watch what I do, because it's going to keep going up there too.
Have a feeling that, he's feeling destined for an MVP award, and he will be 4 years through his contract extension since he signed in 2021 this offseason. He is very much in line for a adjustment, if you will, for what he has due to him.
Absolutely. What does Tua look like? What's the big storyline with the Dolphins right now? Because this offense has not been the powerhouse that we've seen. And I asked the question on my podcast because I'm looking at Sean McVay, what he's doing, and Kevin O'Connell. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, is the Shanahan side of the tree like falling? Is there some like tree rot on that side? Because Kyle Shanahan's offense is looking mediocre this year, and Mike McDaniel's offense is looking mediocre this year, and Bobby Slowick's offense with CJ Stroud hasn't taken the step that you thought that would in year 2, and Kubiak in New Orleans, that's going south quickly. I know there's some injuries, but what's going on in Miami?
So I think the biggest thing that has caught up with Miami this year is the Shanahan tree ideology for offensive line play, which is we covet our tackles. We'd like an athletic center, but the guards, whatever. Like we'll get guys that we like, that we think can do this, but they're not really premium players. Well, the Dolphins have had injuries to their first string left tackle. They've had injuries to they had a season-ending injury mid-season to Austin Jackson, their starting right tackle. The swing tackle, Kendall Lamb, had back tightness this week and couldn't go against the Texans. Patrick Paul, the rookie, has started in place of Teron Armstead at left tackle. So you have all of that interruption at tackle, and then you have guards that are just kind of get by players anyway, because that's the general school of thought at the position. So, and they value continuity in the scheme, and as compared to other teams that are out there really love the physical element and ability to create displacement. They want guys that understand the scheme and rely on the backs to make you right. Well, all of that has kind of created this snowball for Miami offensively. And then just the way that teams are playing them and what the Dolphins spent the offseason doing for answers to what troubled them last year was a lot more underneath stuff with their running backs and tight ends in the passing game. So you have kind of this every game you get 2 or 3 throws that are the big time throws that they hit last year and say, there it is. They can still do it, but they're not doing it to the same degree in which they are. And because the offensive line has now taken on so much water for them this season, they are calling games to varying degrees in any given game, depending on who's available or who's not, around the offensive line. And that has created this box you have put yourself in offensively.
The displacement is a really good term. And it's something that I've noticed with the 49ers, and you can scheme up a good running game, and Kyle Shanahan, it's all about details. And you're right. It's all about that continuity with the offensive line. But when it comes down to it, and you're in the fourth quarter game and you got to get those yards, there's no knockback. There's not that we can't count on getting those yards now, even though the numbers and the yards per carry look great. When you zoom in and you need that one play and you got to get that first down. The 49ers have not been good at doing it.
And it's fascinating because Miami's been the same way, despite being a 21 personnel team and a 12 personnel, like using tight ends and using the fullback to kind of create some under center stuff that you can change the numbers on either side for what the run strength is versus what it starts as. And the short yardage thing for Mike McDaniel's been a 3-year saga. And you get up and you kind of wish it was 3rd and 6 instead of 3rd and 1, which is a sad place to be.
Right.
But that's where they live. Now, a lot more parallels between these two teams we're going to dive into here on this crossover Thursday. Brian Peacock, Locked On 49ers. Kyle Crabbs, Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. We're going to keep this crossover rolling here. It's that time of year. College football is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it is guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love in college football. TNT Sports' coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff Kickoff Show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into the first matchup, SMU versus Penn State at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Don't spend whatever free time you have doom scrolling your 49ers or Dolphins timeline. It's not a productive use of your time. Time is your most precious commodity. Use it to improve yourself. History, economics, great works of literature. Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and many more. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you could start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, and discussions, or you can just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost. It's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Brian, I know nobody likes to use the injury discussion as an excuse for why a season doesn't go well. And San Francisco has been a team that has transcended injuries in some years past and had slow starts and overcome that. But as I look at this 49ers team coming into this game, the injuries are absolutely one of the glaring bullet points that stand out when you look at who's available, who's on injured reserve. Christian McCaffrey never got it going. Brandon Aiyuk has this very robust contract standoff, finally gets it after. Will we get traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers? Maybe it'll be the Commanders. Oh, no, we're just going to sign here in San Francisco anyway. And then he has a season-ending injury. Trent Williams has been banged up. What's the expectation? I know Nick Bosa was back this past week. What's the expectation for the talent available for this game? Who might be banged up? Who might we not see?
At this point, everyone's banged up, and it's a lot of people talk about Super Bowl hangover, and I think a lot of it is psychological, and it's hard to climb that mountain every single year. But when you play 20 games in back-to-back seasons, you're going to start to wear down. And one of the things that I've kind of preached to my listeners is like, you probably shouldn't be surprised that the guy who touched the ball more times than anybody in the league got hurt the following year, right? And everyone wants to blame the Madden curse and blame the Super Bowl. It's just like, this is it's a battle of attrition in the NFL. And I think the 49ers have done a poor job of overcoming some of the injuries. And they've even had a really good rookie class with some young guys being able to jump in and play. And they really weren't playing that great before the injuries. So I can't blame it all on injuries, but it does add to the level of difficulty. And the 49ers kind of turned up that level of difficulty on themselves, I think, this year. Made it more difficult than it needed to be. And you start having injuries, and now you can't bank on playmakers out there. And it starts to, I think I'll put it into perspective. There's a great stat that we were talking about this week, which is the 49ers had 40 touchdowns combined between Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Aiyuk, and Deebo Samuel last year. 40 touchdowns. This year they have 2 from those 3 guys. And it's hard to find the playmakers. Juwan Jennings has stepped up and been real nice. Ricky Pearsall, you have a first-round wide receiver. It's like, okay, you lose your wide receiver. Let's see what the rookie's got. And he's just a cardio king out there every week. Gets no targets, runs routes, and has no factor on the game. And we talked about the offensive line. You're missing Trent Williams, who's a Hall of Fame left tackle. And maybe he's not the guy he once was, but he's still one of the best in the league, and he's not out there for you. You miss, I think it was really big on the defensive side of the ball, missing Dre Greenlaw all year long, and he was phenomenal in the first half of the game last week. Felt a little something in his knee, so we'll see if he's going to be able to go. And his energy, he makes such a difference, and it was almost shocking to see what that defense looked like with Dre Greenlaw, with him and without him, even for one half of football. Nick Bosa is the most important player, I think, on the football team. He's been banged up, dealing with a hip, but he came back. But, I mean, when you just start to put it all together, it was too much for the 49ers this year to overcome. And that's sort of part of the thing where you point to the quarterbacks and you start to look in the future. It's like, well, at some point, pretty soon, if you pay your quarterback top of the market money, he's going to have to do it with kind of the team we saw, the banged up version, because there's not going to be Debo, and there's not going to be Trent Williams. There's not going to be Christian McCaffrey out there in probably the pretty near future for the San Francisco 49ers. So maybe we're seeing a glimpse of that. And I think that's what's got the 49ers fans right now in a little bit of a weird headspace as we finish the last 3 weeks of the season and head into the 2025 offseason.
So I would like to parlay that, if I can, into an expansion on Purdy. We talked on the contract. What has been your assessment? I know the numbers are obviously down, but what has been your assessment of, maybe sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story? How has he played? How has he looked in the midst of having to try to be a little bit more of an engine? And I know these offenses, the Shanahan offenses, they all love to get the running game going, and they build so many of their pass concepts off of these run actions that they have. And if that's not as effective, and you don't have as many separators or big body guys like Aiyuk with what he brings from a catch radius perspective, how has Brock himself navigated through that, in your opinion?
Yeah, and it's so important for Kyle Shanahan's offense to stay in front of the sticks and be able to have his whole play sheet at his disposal, and be able to use his matchups as he wants, and utilize the running game and the running game into the passing game. And like I mentioned, the yards per carry were fine even without Christian McCaffrey. So I can't really point to that. Obviously, there's a dynamic element and a passing game element that Christian McCaffrey gives you that Jordan Mason did not this year. But there's been games when Brock Purdy looked phenomenal. It was like, wow, Brock Purdy was awesome in this game. And the yards, the air yards were a little higher, and the 49ers went from like the best yak team in the league to the worst yak team in the league. And he's holding on to the ball a little bit longer and making plays. And then as the season went on a little bit longer, the more he was doing that, the more it looked disjointed and didn't look like the Kyle Shanahan offense. And I don't know if it was by design, where Kyle Shanahan wanted to lean a little bit more into that with Brock Purdy, put more on his shoulders and have him make bigger throws. But I think he has missed some stuff that was there that he didn't miss last year. Some throws have been off for sure. Some decision-making hasn't been quite as good, and he's had fewer playmakers. So I think it's been a little bit of everything with Brock Purdy. And my big worry with Brock Purdy that you see is, and it's not going to be a problem, I'm guessing, in Florida this weekend, but bad weather games. And when it's raining, and Brock Purdy, he's not a physically impressive guy, and his arm is kind of like right at that barrier of like, it starts to get troublesome if you start to lose arm strength from where you're at. And when he throws the ball in the rain, I think he goes underneath that line. And so that's one of the things I've seen with Brock Purdy for sure. And last week we saw it, and the 49ers couldn't muster offense, and he's missing guys badly in the rain. We saw it against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland last year, where Brock Purdy just had his worst game of the year in the rain and can't hit guys, and he's missing easier throws. And then on top of it, makes a bad decision late, and missing deep balls, 0 for 8 on balls down the field. So it's been a really up and down season, and Brock Purdy's had some really good games this year, but as a whole, it's been down, even when he had a more full complement of his weapons earlier on in the season. And recently, and especially last week in the rain, he was flat out bad.
That would be one of the fascinating matchups for me in this game, is the Dolphins defense against San Francisco, where a defense that they rank 6th in the NFL in yards given up defensively, and they're 13th in points. They've had respectable showcases. They've had some negative game scripts where teams have jumped on them early. They struggled early in the season. They gave up 31 to Tennessee in a game in which you just lost the field position battle all day with your backup quarterback. But they've been good against the run. They just haven't really been able to consistently create turnovers. But I think about, the matchup with San Francisco and the parallels between the two teams and what San Francisco has on their defensive line. And then Miami with Chop Robinson as a rookie who's coming on, along with Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell is a really nice 1-2 punch that kind of, without Christian McCaffrey, without Jordan Mason, I'm really fascinated to see what the matchups look like when San Francisco has the ball, because it feels like you alluded to it with Nick Bosa, and that was kind of the thing immediately after the game that Tua Tagovailoa said as well. He said, next 3 weeks, we're going to find out who loves football. And the way that I've been viewing it as this team doesn't have the accolades that San Francisco does, and you're maybe looking at a general manager change. You're putting everything under the microscope. They've got a lot of veterans that are there. This 3 stretch of games is a very big piece of who's part of the solutions with what went wrong this season and who's part of the problem. It's a little bit less of, well, we got to pay the quarterback, so we're expecting X, Y, or Z. The Dolphins went through that and letting Robert Hunt and Christian Wilkins walk out the door last offseason. It's more, who can you bank on to get the ship righted and get things turned around? And for the defense specifically, where I think the majority of their work has to be done, despite the fact that they have some favorable metrics in their favor as far as the performance this year, I'm looking forward to seeing it against San Francisco. Now, we're going to get into keys to victory for this Week 16 matchup. Hard Rock Stadium, Miami Dolphins hosting the San Francisco 49ers. That's coming your way next. Make sure that you guys stick with us. You can tackle all of the NFL action this weekend, not just 49ers Dolphins, with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page is where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with that $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. As things currently stand, we are recording, it's Wednesday afternoon. I don't believe this line has moved at all week. Miami at home favored by 1.5. And then the game total is at 44.5. So the books seem to think both defenses will do their job this weekend with a little bit of a lower number. So if either one of those tickles your fancy, you can get that action over at FanDuel. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I would be an awful host to not give you the floor for what you feel, Brian, are your 3 keys to victory for the San Francisco 49ers coming across the country for a 4:25 kick at Hard Rock Stadium.
Yeah, love the later kick. West Coast kick time on the East Coast is nice.
Must be nice.
Yeah, that is.
Must be nice.
When I was younger, I used to be so jealous of the East Coast. I was like, dude, watching games at midnight, that's awesome. Then you get older, you become a dad, and you're like, oh man, I love this 10 a.m. football over here on the West Coast. And all the late games are over by 8:30 p.m. Still do a podcast. It's not even that late post game if your team's playing in prime time. But 1:30 is the right time to play a football game. Let's just be
local time or
local time. It's the right time. That's when football should be played. And so it's good for us. Not as good for you, a little bit later start time over there. But you mentioned the lines there with the FanDuel read. The 49ers are always favored, even with they're not playing good and they're banged up. And, if you kind of have a game that seems like it's pretty equal matchup and equal records and, a game that might be somewhat of a pick 'em you would expect, the Niners are always favored in those games. So if FanDuel's jumping off the bandwagon for the 49ers, the Niners are in trouble right now, that they're not favored. And that means money is coming in on the Dolphins side. But for the 49ers, they have to get back to what they've been, and they've got to be able to make big plays, and they've got to win some matchups at the line of scrimmage. And I've been borderline appalled at how many games the 49ers haven't won up front this year, because that's what they were built on, especially on the defensive line. It was day one, like line one of the manifesto of John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, that we're going to build this thing around the defensive line. They even famously didn't scout Patrick Mahomes or the quarterbacks in the 2017 draft, because we're going to build this around the defensive line, and they drafted Solomon Thomas with their first pick. It was a big statement. And while that was a mistake, the statement and the plan I was on board with. And so watching how they haven't won up front in a lot of games, and especially late in games, they can't close it out even when they have a lead. It's been pretty distressing. So the 49ers have to be able to beat the Miami Dolphins offensive line, put some pressure on Tua, win some of those battles up front, with or without Dre Greenlaw. They have to be good with run fits. Obviously, Devondre Campbell's not going to be there either because he walked out the door and got suspended. It's just been one of those seasons for the 49ers, by the way. Injuries and guys getting pneumonia and just everything you could possibly imagine. Holdouts. Everything seems to be working against the San Francisco 49ers. But now that they know who's around and maybe a galvanizing moment with a team that knows they're not in it anymore, can you prove that you belong on the team next year, and can you be part of this thing? And you got to win some of those battles up front. So that's where it starts for me for the 49ers. Get some movement in the running game, make some plays, some catch and run opportunities, and the defensive line beating the Dolphins offensive line is the number one matchup I think the 49ers have to win.
And I think for me in Miami, you need to find a way to get Tyreek Hill involved offensively. And what I hope that means is not tempting the middle of the field where Fred Warner, regardless of who the other linebacker is, Fred Warner is the kind of guy that's got a gravitational pull unlike any other linebacker in the NFL. So they have been tight end and running back reliant, and those guys often get their targets in the middle of the field. The Dolphins had done a really nice job, and I think Houston had between Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley, they had a couple of guys that were playing hard flats and are really explosive and twitchy, and they kind of voluntarily gave up other portions of the field and did not surrender that those outside the numbers inside of 10-yard throws that the Dolphins had done a really good job of taking those profits when other teams were giving them to them. I think that's the challenge for Miami is middle of the field. We know you're going to try to take your shots in there, but you have to stay on schedule and get your best player the ball in a way that if that's going to play into what San Francisco is probably expecting and banking and constructing much of their plan to do the way that the Texans did, how else can you get Tyreek Hill the ball? I think that's the big question for them that they're going to need to answer if they're going to have a shot in this game, especially because of the pass rush ability that they have. I have no idea who's going to be playing tackles. Like Mike McDaniel left it open for it to be both Kendall Lamb and Teron Armstead, who both missed last week. And if this is it for Teron Armstead, I'm sure he's not going to want to start a game against the Jets, leave after 3 plays in the first possession, and then surrender his job to a rookie in Patrick Paul and ride off into the sunset and that be the way that he goes out. So I've got no idea who's playing, but if it's not those guys in particular who can hold up in pass protection, then finding where are the free access throws on time. That's going to be the thing I think that is going to be most important for Miami.
What happened with Jaylen Waddle this year? And I'm asking this mostly as a fantasy owner of his, and he became a guy. So I fully expect now that I was out of the playoffs that he's going to play and end up having some huge game against the 49ers, right? So what's going on with his injury situation, and what happened with him this year being a guy that had a couple of good games, but it seemed like he was just an afterthought in the offense.
Yeah. So his after catch production was down a little bit, and it was also down from the previous year in which he led the league with 18.1 yards per catch in 2022. It felt like, aside of the 4 games in which they just had a non-functional passing offense, and they couldn't do anything. And Brian, when I say anything, they could not hand the ball off from me to you 2 yards away from each other. Like, that's how bad it was. If you remove that block of the season, though, he was on pace for the same amount of targets as what he had the previous season. And he was close to the same yards per target amount. But they took the Tyreek Hill push for 2K yardage thing, and they split that yardage between Tyreek and Devon Achane and Jonnu Smith. And as a result, teams were still really committed to, we're going to play press on the 2 guys outside that are the speedsters. And it led to more big spots and more big space for the other players. So it was good that they anticipated that and invested in those positions. But teams have been slow to adjust with how they've played against it. And they've been continuing to give that free access. And that's been the biggest area of growth for Tua Tagovailoa this year is, and I had this critique going all the way back to when he came out of Alabama. Dude, take easy completions when they give them to you. And, so much of the offense last year was predicated on those 15-yard inbreakers that they ran, and they ran it into the teeth of the defense at times, and it got guys lit up. And you saw that against Grant Dubose, where they inverted into a Tampa 2, and they had the high post safety who just stood there, and he drove on it, and Grant Dubose had a really scary injury with that. So it's been a little bit more distribution-based. It sounds like he's day-to-day. He did not practice on Wednesday, but Mike McDaniel left the door open, just kind of got leg whipped and rolled up on, trying to peel back down and block on a safety that was coming down in the run game. So, but I mean, he had 2 of the 3 previous games before Houston. He went for 8, 144 and a touchdown and 9 for 99. So it was starting to, like, everything was coming together and looked like he was going to have his big blow up spots. And then of course gets hurt against Houston.
Mike McDaniel's not on the hot seat, is he? Because I was interested to see that there's maybe a GM change happening, but head coach is safe over there.
I would assume so. I would assume Mike has enough good graces. Now, if they're catastrophic the last 3 games, I think you maybe get into opening the door for that conversation, but they're very collaboration based. And the general manager that's been there, Chris Greer, he is so collaborative that he molds his own identities to whatever coach he has to an umpteenth degree, that if Mike says we don't need to worry about guards and, Skylar Thompson's been in the system for 2 years, we don't need to worry about a backup quarterback. And those things come up and bite you in the rear. Like, you can only take so many of those L's before you're the guy that rubber stamps everything. And it's like, okay, maybe we need somebody who's going to push back on you a little bit more and actually be a little bit more collaborative and just saying, instead of saying, yeah, whatever you want, let's do that. So I would assume Mike is safe. I would expect if things, maybe they run the table, we can get some momentum and they feel really good about where they're at next year. But I would expect that this year for Mike McDaniel specifically, if there is a general manager change, there will be pressure on him next season at a minimum.
Can't wait for this one. I think it's going to be really fun. I always love watching Mike McDaniel's coach teams. I think they're really interesting, and these teams are very familiar with each other, even though they don't play a lot. So, it's going to be a fun one out there, I think, on Sunday. Yeah,
I don't think too many concepts will be broken out that these teams haven't seen practicing against themselves and then going back to the game in 2022 as well. So it'll be a fascinating matchup. It's a for the love of the game showcase. If you're watching, it's probably for the love of the game as well. So we hope you enjoy. Here's to a healthy game for both teams. We appreciate you guys for checking out the crossover here on the Locked On Network. Make sure to check out all of your favorite teams for all of your favorite sports. We have it all here on the Locked On Network. Crossover Thursday, that is it. Locked On 49ers, they'll get you set up for the game again on Friday and then have you in the immediate aftermath on the post game. Same here on Locked On Dolphins. Your teams every day. Appreciate you guys checking out the crossover and enjoy the rest of your day.